Cheryl and I were faced, when we began to think about our presentation here, with the same kind of terror and anxiety that assaults all kinds of students and researchers when they begin to figure out a project that they want to do and find, in fact, that yes, there's a lot of information. There's boundless and limitless amounts of information. It's terrifying to try to decide where to start. And so it occurred to us that an interesting topic today might be the idea that often students and researchers are at their most creative when they're really very confined. So do not free them, confine them was our idea. And we were inspired to think then immediately of the sonnet, because the sonnet form was made for exactly this sort of thing, to be a very confining form of poetry in which the poet was meant to show great skill and great ability. The sonnet form was imported to England from Italy in the time of Queen Elizabeth's court. Along with it came another very popular Italian idea, and this was the spirit of sprezzatura. And sprezzatura was a desirable thing for any courtier to have. And sprezzatura means to do a lot of very difficult, different types of things very well. In fact, so well that it appears to be effortless. Sir Philip Sidney was a great courtier of Elizabeth's. He absolutely embodied sprezzatura. He was a war hero. He managed a very large and complex estate. He was apparently a fabulous dancer. He also had beautiful legs, which he arrayed with various hosieries. There's lots of historical evidence about Sir Philip Sidney's hosiery. And of course, he wrote sonnets. Being able to write a sonnet was the sign of achieving true sprezzatura. Elizabeth herself wrote sonnets for exactly this reason. She had to stay out in front of the rest of her courtiers. In fact, one of Sir Philip Sidney's fellow courtiers called the sonnet infinite riches, packing infinite riches into a little room. And this was the goal of the whole of the sonneteering world. Now, the little room is quite confined. The dimensions of it are quite defined. 14 lines, 140 syllables for a Shakespearean sonnet. Sidney actually allowed himself 12 syllables a line, a little bit more. Iambic hexameter or pentameter, depending on the sonneteer, and a set rhyme scheme. The riches that were packed into this little room were the ancient Greek literary figures inherited from Aristotle, particularly during the Renaissance, and a great joy to the courtiers. I find students love these of all ages, even second graders. I helped write sonnets recently because they have these fantastical far out names, words, these ancient Greek words. It makes them feel sophisticated, and then they do tremendous acrobatics with the language according to these particular literary figures. So some of the ones we're much more familiar with would be metaphor or oxymoron, onomatopoeia. But these are a few of the rarer ones. A syndeton, to be not bound, meaning to list things in a line without using proper contractions between them. Anadiplosis, to double back, repeat a word that's been used at the end of a phrase at the beginning of the next one. Paranomasia is really double entendre, having a word have two or more meanings. Prosopopoeia, making a mask, in other words, personification, characterizing an abstract idea in human form. And hyperbole, exaggeration for effect, which students really love to do, as we know. So Sidney himself wrote a sonnet cycle that was on a traditional Elizabethan topic, and that was of love. Especially love that's unrequited. There's the lover who's pursuing the beloved. In this case, he called the beloved Stella, which means star, and the pursuer was Astrophil, star lover. But that's the surface topic. Actually, each of the little sonnets has some other topic that's quite human and much more mundane. The first sonnet in a cycle, actually in the end, is about procrastination and writer's block. But in this small space, he expressed himself with the infinite riches of the Greek figurative language. Sydney's Sonnet 1. Loving in truth and fain in verse my love to show, that she, dear she, might take some pleasure of my pain. Pleasure might cause her read, reading might make her know, knowledge might pity win, and pity grace obtain. I sought fit words to paint the blackest face of woe, studying inventions fine, her wits to entertain, oft turning others' leaves, to see if thence would flow some fresh and fruitful showers upon my sunburned brain. But words came halting forth, wanting invention's stay. Invention meaning here imagination. Imagination, nature's child, fled stepdame studies blows, and others' feet still seemed but strangers in my way. Thus, great with child to speak and helpless in my throes, biting my truant pen, beating myself for spite, fool, said my muse to me, look in thy heart and write. And he ends with this preposterous idea of commanding the muse to just tell him to pull it together and get his work done. That is not really in the spirit of the love poem we thought we were beginning with. Here, just some of the things that he's packed in is an Alexandrine line, which is an extra long line that imitates the poetic line that was used for the famous wars of Alexander the Great. So right there, there's some hyperbole, that his pursuit of the beloved is similar to Alexander in his great wars, pursuit of other cultures in his great wars. In the third line, we see a syndeton. Pleasure might cause her read, reading might make her know. There's no conjunction there, and it causes a cascading effect of one thing into the next. And a diplosis to double back. We have pleasure might cause her read, reading might make her know, knowledge might pity win, and pity grace obtain. So stepping forward with the word, but then looking back to it. Hyperbole, really the blackest face of woe he is at this particular point. I mean, I've been in these places where I have writer's block, but I don't really feel I have the blackest face of woe. Consonants down on about the 10th line here. Fresh and fruitful showers. We know that its partner is assonance, which is when vowels are repeated to hold a line together. Prosopopoeia, personification. Invention here is imagination, the child of nature. Fleeing, study, who is personified as some kind of, I don't know, club-wielding character who's going to beat imagination senseless. Paranomasia, double meaning, with feet on the next line. Others' feet, meaning others' traditions and others' words are crowding his mind. But also the foot, a foot of poetry is the unstressed and stressed foot of an iamb, of iambic poetry. And finally, we end with a conceit, which is an elaborate and unusual comparison. Certainly, this is completely preposterous that our male poet, seeking, searching, stalking the beloved, compares himself to a woman who's so pregnant, she's about to deliver, but is holding in the baby. So finally, the pregnant woman has to bite her pen to bear the pain and then deliver the sonnet. That's a conceit, completely ridiculous. The sonnet form is so fascinating to poets, being so very confined, but wanting to be able to express infinite meaning throughout it, that it survived for 450 years. In fact, our current poet laureate of the Library of Congress won a Pulitzer Prize in 2007 for her sonnet cycle, which was about a topic Sydney could never have expected or thought of, which was the experience for black soldiers as members of the Army in the American Civil War. Her name is Natasha Trethewey, and our representative from the Library of Congress project will tell us about that.
So the responsibility of the Poet Laureate is to promote poetry to the American people, in a way showing us in the modern day how to have sprezzatura. And what's wonderful about what the Poet Laureate does is they're given about $36,000 and they're set free. Go do what you must do to promote poetry. And they're set in this wonderful small office, you can see it in the picture there, and they literally give us infinite riches from this little room. And using these traditional forms, as Natasha Trethewey has done in Native Guard, they can present us with modern concepts like racism, which is explored in this poem, Southern History, which is from the same book as Native Guard. And in this poem, she's used the same types of literary figures as Sydney has, but in a much more modern way. "Before the war, they were happy," he said, quoting our textbook. This was senior year history class. "The slaves were clothed, fed, and better off under a master's care." I watched the words blur on the page. No one raised a hand, disagreed, not even me. It was late. We still had Reconstruction to cover before the test, and luckily, 3 hours of watching Gone with the Wind. History, the teacher said, of the Old South, a true account of how things were back then. On screen, a slave stood big as life. Big mouth, bucked eyes, our textbook's grinning proof. A lie my teacher guarded. Silent, so did I. So you see in this first line, this massive understatement about the state of mind of the slaves, that they were actually happy during slavery. And we call that meiosis. And then we come back down to Reconstruction, and we see paronomasia again, just like Pam talked about earlier, Dr. Troyer, excuse me. And paronomasia is a double meaning. So we have Reconstruction, both of the United States coming back from the Civil War trying to rebuild, and this teacher who's retelling the story based on Gone with the Wind. And when she mentions Gone with the Wind down below, it's set right next to history, this beautiful juxtaposition which just kind of punches up the irony of the next line after the history line, and Gone with the Wind representing a true account. And then finally, she goes down to the last 3 lines and expresses hyperbole with this slave who is big as life, and the textbook grins at her, knowing that it's a lie and knowing that she can't do anything about it. And we call that a prosopopeia, this personification of the textbook. And we find that in the modern day, poets love to be limited. They love to confine themselves. And what they've done is they've taken to the tweet, which has 140 characters, just like the sonnet has 140 syllables, and they've confined their poetry to that. And 2 of the former poet laureates, Billy Collins and Robert Pinsky, have both done this. And Collins wrote a short piece, this beautiful piece. It's untitled. The poem creates a space. It hides in a tent in a forest. Making its own bed, it falls asleep in the dark, wakes up under a lamp or the sun. And then Robert Pinsky also took to tweeting to create a poem I think you guys are all going to enjoy, called Low-Pay Piecework. The 5th grade teacher and her followers. 5 classes, 28 in each, all hers. 140 different characters. So we find now that because there is so much information available to us, it's still appealing to help students develop sprezzatura, which is best expressed in a small space. Thank you.